When I first moved into that building, it was exactly what I had been hoping for: quiet, clean, and tucked away on a sleepy side street in the city. The rent was surprisingly affordable, the view was decent, and my floor only had 2 units. Mine and the one across the hall. The leasing agent told me an older gentleman lived there, a man named Mr. Harold. She described him as harmless and reserved. That's exactly what I wanted in a neighbor. The first time I saw him, I was dragging a box of books into the apartment. I looked up and saw him standing in his doorway, just watching. No smile, no nod, just standing there like a statue in his brown cardigan, eyes locked on mine. I muttered a polite hi. He didn't say a word, just stepped back and quietly closed the door. I brushed it off. Maybe he was just shy. A few days later, I stepped on my balcony for some fresh air. It was late, maybe 11:30 p.m. That's when I saw him, Mr. Harold, standing at his window, staring directly into mine. The light behind him was dim, but I could make out the shape of his figure, perfectly still, his hands at his sides. I squinted, unsure if he was even looking at me. But then he blinked. I flinched and quickly stepped back. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe he's just looking at the street or the sky. The next night, same time, he was there again. And the night after that, by the 5th night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, waiting to see if he'd appear. 11:28, nothing. 11:32, there he was. Same spot, same stare, no movement. This time, I pulled out my phone and took a picture. But when I looked at the photo, there was nothing in the window, just empty curtains. I chalked it up to bad lighting or poor focus. I wanted to believe that. But the next morning, things changed. There was an envelope slid under my door. No name, no return address. Inside was a photograph of me, asleep. It had been taken from outside my bedroom window. I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding in my ears. I ran straight to the leasing office and demanded to know who else had keys to my floor. The woman behind the desk frowned. "Only you and the tenant in Unit 204, Mr. Harold." I told her what had been happening, showed her the photo. Her expression darkened. "That's impossible," she said. "I stared at her, confused." "What?" She leaned in. "Mr. Harold passed away last year." I shook my head. "That's not possible. I've seen him. I've spoken to him." She pulled up the tenant record for 204. It was empty. The apartment had been vacant for over 10 months. I sprinted back upstairs, heart racing. I banged on Harold's door. No answer, so I forced it open. The room was empty, dusty, the air stale, untouched. No furniture, no personal belongings, not even curtains. The window where I had seen him for 5 nights, boarded up from the inside. I moved out 2 days later, but sometimes, late at night, I still dream of that window and the man who never blinked. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood with my mom. We lived in a small duplex, 2 homes side by side, with a single wall separating us from the neighbors. The couple who lived next door were older. I didn't see them much, but the husband, Mark, gave me a weird feeling. He always seemed too quiet, too polite. The kind of polite that feels rehearsed. His wife, Sandra, was the opposite, bubbly, talkative, always smiling. But one day she was just gone. My mom said she'd moved out suddenly to care for her sick sister up north. That's what Mar told everyone. But late at night, I'd hear things. It started as muffled thuds, barely noticeable, then dragging noises like something heavy being pulled across the floor, and sometimes sobbing. I'd press my ear to the wall and swear I heard a woman's voice, faint, almost like a whisper. One night, I caught the words, "Please, please let me go." I told my mom. She said I was probably dreaming, but the sounds kept coming, louder, more desperate. Then, one night, I heard a scream. Not loud, not panicked, but raw, guttural. I jumped up and ran to my mom's room, but she was already on the phone with the police. They arrived quickly, knocked on Mark's door. No answer. Eventually, they forced it open. Inside, everything was spotless, clean to the point of suspicion. Mark sat on the couch, watching the news, completely unfazed. He said he'd been asleep and heard nothing. Said Sandra was still out of town and that we must have imagined it. The police didn't press it, but something felt wrong. A few days later, While putting away Christmas decorations in our attic, I found a panel in the wall I'd never noticed before. It looked like an access panel to the crawl space between the homes. Curious and uneasy, I opened it. Inside was a narrow, dusty tunnel leading straight into the space above Mark's unit. And there were things. Women's clothing, old makeup kits, jewelry, a blonde wig, neatly combed, and a shoe. Just one. Blood on the sole. I told my mom. She called the police again. But by the time they returned, Mark was gone. Completely vanished. No trace. No forwarding address. The crawl space was sealed. Years later, I read a news article. A man fitting his description had been arrested in another state, hiding in a motel with a missing woman locked in the bathroom. It was Mark. He had been living a double life for years, keeping women captive, sometimes right behind the wall. A few years back, my friend Tom moved into a townhouse complex just outside of town. He was ex-military, tough as nails, not the kind of guy who gets scared easily. But after a month, he called me, sounding uneasy. "It's my neighbor," he said. "This woman, she just watches me." The woman was in her 70s. Her name was Dottie. Harmless, it seemed, always out on her porch, sipping tea. But she never took her eyes off Tom's house. Day or night, she just sits there, he said, watching, smiling, doesn't blink. I laughed at first, told him he was overthinking, until I saw it for myself. I visited one weekend, and sure enough, there she was, sitting in a plastic chair on her porch, eyes locked on Tom's front door, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. That night, Tom and I had a few drinks and passed out on the couch. Around 3 a.m., the sound of a creaking door woke us up. His front door. Tom jumped up, bat in hand. We searched the entire house. No one, but in the kitchen, sitting on the counter, was a slice of pie, homemade, still warm. There was a napkin folded neatly beside it, with 2 words, "Sleep tight." Tom was furious. He stormed next door the next morning, but Dottie just stood there smiling. "I didn't bake anything," she said. "You should rest more. You look tired." A week later, another note appeared, this time taped to his bedroom window from the outside. "You sleep heavy. I've seen things." He moved out that weekend. 3 months later, she was arrested after another neighbor caught her sneaking through their doggy door at night. When police searched her home, they found dozens of journals filled with notes, observations, times, names, habits, descriptions. She had been watching every neighbor for years. But Tom's name had its own journal, and it was full.